Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claris Community Live. I'm Rosemary Teege, Community Engagement Manager at Claris, and joining me today from Claris is Martha, who's helping with production, and also Todd Geist from Proofgeist, and David Willison from Devon. And we are going to talk about mastering DevOps for FileMaker. So as we get started, please do click on the three dots that say apps and complete our survey, which I think Martha is getting up and running right now, just so that the panelists have a bit more grounding on your current experience and familiarity with DevOps. And while you do that, Todd and David, why don't you both introduce yourselves?
Go ahead, David.
Hey, I'm David. I'm the CEO of Devon. I created Devon through my master's thesis 5 years ago and have been like a FileMaker developer before that. Then I turned into some more software nitty-gritty stuff, and now I'm trying to, talk about DevOps for FileMaker.
I'm Todd Geist. I'm the CTO of Proofgeist. I hope there are people out there who haven't ever seen me before. That would be really cool. But I've been doing FileMaker for a long time, since the 90s. And the DevOps focus has started way back in the early days and now is pretty critical to what we do. Not only do we have a lot of services customers that our services team manage and doing custom software for them, but we also have a hosting platform which is all about DevOps, and we have something, I don't know, close to 800 or 1,000 FileMaker servers that we manage through a DevOps platform for ourselves and for our customers. So it's pretty critical to how we approach the whole FileMaker software development game.
And just as people are still filling out the survey, but out of the votes we have right now, half of our audience does do development live in production. 40% rarely, only in an emergency. As far as roles, about half in-house developers, about a third work for a partner, and 20% are independent consultants who are not a Claris partner. And for familiarity, I'm going to actually show this one to the audience. It's pretty flat with from not at all the way up to fully on board. And about, I think the biggest one is 30% are starting to use best practices. So about half are either familiar, not in practice, or starting to use best practices. And as for tools, right now, the two biggest vote getters are manual with the data migration tool and OttoFMS, both about 40%. And Devon is at about 9 or 10%. And yes, frequently for sound, best to use the WebEx app and not the in-app browser if you are having audio issues. I just saw a chat question about that. So with that, to get started, I think I would ask both of you this question, but do you want to just kind of summarize what is DevOps? What do we mean when we say DevOps?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a quick jump at it. I mean, just to break down the word, because maybe it's not familiar to people, it's developer operations. So it's basically the practice around how to make not the software development, the writing code, easier and better and safer, as much as the deployment, scaling, maintenance, management of those applications once they are up in production, right? So it's all the stuff that comes sort of after you have after you've built an app or you've got something that people are using. How do you make sure that it stays in production? It doesn't crash. How do you not take your users offline? How can you automate that so that it's not basically a manual bunch of steps that you're doing? One of the sort of tenets of DevOps is that if you're doing something manually, like where a person has to go and like download a file from, say, your development server, move it over to another server, run the data migration tool manually, and put it back up on your production server and do all that. If you have to do all that manually, at some point there's a high likelihood that you're going to make a mistake. And actually, the more risky that operation is, so let's say there's some feature that has to get shipped right now. It's a panic. It's Friday afternoon. We got to get this done. The more risky and the more stressful the time during that manual process, the more likely that you're going to make a mistake. And that's not because you're a bad person. It's not because you're a failure as a human being. It's just that's the nature of manual processes, is that you will skip stuff. In fact, there's a great book called the Checklist Manifesto, which goes into how even the most expert people in the world can't be relied on to do a series of steps manually. They were talking about doctors in this case, but it just doesn't matter. You will skip a step at some point. And so DevOps is all about, how do you not do that? How do you make sure that every part of the process that you're doing is tracked in some way and is automated as much as possible so that those problems don't occur? And that's anyway my way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Like all about working smarter and not harder, right? As many of those steps that you have from development to production, as many of those that are automated, then you can just work more risk-free, because you can always go back if you ship something that messed up something in production, or yeah. So it's really about, I see a lot about like supporting an agile and very iterative development process. It also kind of supports the more modern project management frameworks, like Scrum, for instance. Probably a lot of the developers out there already have heard Scrum, or like working in a Scrum kind of project management style. And DevOps is basically the technological methodology that fits Scrum, because it's all about shipping small, final, stable iterations of your code. So yeah.
Someone sent me a private message saying, I never make a mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, and just also someone said, this is really important if you have to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley or high trust or other standards. And I'll just also remind everybody, please, if you want to make a comment, send it to everybody in chat. Like, you can change the who it's to, and not just to the panelists or to me, because it's always fun to have good engagement in the chat. And David, you said something about risk, and I just would love to dig into that a little bit more of, especially in the FileMaker world, what are some of the risks of doing development in production in a panic in the middle of the workday? And I can start with one. I know, and I didn't know better back when I was a starting out developer in my first big office environment. I would, you do something and you save a layout change, and all of a sudden the view that all your users has changes in the middle of the day when they're doing something, and then they're like, what just happened? And that's just not a good experience to build trust in your application.
Oh, no, it's really, that can be really critical if you edit something live and you have a lot of clients connected. You may, remove fields or mess up with tables or some calculation stuff while people are connected. That can get really ugly. And it's, that's one of the strengths of FileMaker, that you can actually do that. But it also becomes one of the pitfalls, because you kind of give the developer too much flexibility almost. Yeah. So that's why I think more and more you want to, instead of just building and shipping simultaneously, the modern approach is more to build and then verify that it's actually working and then ship it in a controlled and automated way. So that's how you mitigate that risk, at least, that you don't put something out in production. I'll also show later some some ways that you can actually test some of your functionality before shipping it, so that you can reduce that risk even further.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a number of incidents over my career where where developing live has just been really has caused a lot of problems. There's early on, very early on, I was working on a project that a company was using, that a sales team with 30 salespeople who were on the phone all day with customers, and the CRM was 100% custom FileMaker, managed the entire thing. And we made a change to the database, and the whole thing went down, and 30 salespeople had nothing to do for the rest of the day. That cost that company significant amounts of money. It was not like a little whoopsie, I mean, not a big deal, nobody noticed. No, the entire company sales team, 30 people who were get paid to be on the phone and talk to their customers and look at the data, could not do anything for the entire day, because that's what it took to bring the system back up after we crashed it. So that things like that were just sort of early on implanted in my psyche, that we really got to figure out better ways to do this. And frankly, the tooling in those early days didn't give us a lot of opportunities to do this well, because it would take, on a system like that, it might take 40 hours to do a data migration, take a whole weekend. Luckily, a number of years ago, Claris shipped the data migration tool, which made which made it possible to even consider doing dev to prod migrations in a quick amount of time. So yeah, it's obviously the risk of each project is different. Like, not all projects cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if they go down per hour. Others do, and so you have to weigh that into how much of these practices you need to adopt. But certainly, if you have a project where there's significant amounts of money for every hour the system is down, that's lost, then you need to consider these kinds of practices.
I also feel often I hear, like, the biggest misconception I hear is like adopting DevOps. Like, DevOps has been kind of like a scary word for some. So people think that it's really hard to implement into their workflows. And now, as you say, it's hard with the tooling, and now with tools like Otto and Devon, and also the advancements that Claris are doing to their command line tools that makes us, build better tools off of that. It's really not hard anymore. So it used to be hard, but now it's quite the opposite. It's actually about making life easier for the developer and for the team. I think that's a very important point.
So besides risk mitigation and compliance, are there other reasons why DevOps is important?
I mean,
it's all about supporting. Oh, sorry, you want to go?
I mean, there's risk mitigation around, we talked about doing development and production, but there's also automated backups to offsite backup systems, so that if your system gets taken over by hackers, you have a secure, non-encrypted backup, which has hit a lot of people in the FileMaker community over the years, where somebody gets on the server and they encrypt the FileMaker files, and all the available backups that are on that machine are all encrypted, and you have to pay a ransom to get that stuff back. So having offsite backups in place, also the ability to monitor and intervene with things that might be going wrong on the server, or also performance issues. Do you have the tooling available to help you diagnose why a particular operation may be really slow? And that's not a coding thing. That's more like being able to gather and collate the logs that are on the server and give developers the feedback they need to be able to diagnose problems in a running system.
And again, going back to my analogy before with the Scrum project management framework, like, it's kind of going from the old waterfall model where you're doing everything in a slow and kind of sequential way. Adopting DevOps allows you to move faster and more smooth throughout all the phases of your app lifecycle. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of questions about versioning and branching code. So, like, there's a couple comments about how hard it is with FileMaker to kind of do branching. So, do you guys want to talk a little bit about how practices or
Sure.
tools you use to do that?
So in Devon, we've built a way to easily branch your code. Of course, we're still limited by some of the underlying Claris technologies, but I mean, they're also advancing slowly. But we have a branching feature in Devon where you can very easily kind of like duplicate one of your isolated development copies and then work on that. And then you can release that back into the original branch if you want to. We're still not there like in the Git and GitHub world where you can actually merge code or merge files. We can't do that yet. With the patch tool, that's something that maybe we're going to be able to do someday. But for now, not. But at least in our tool, and I'll also show that later, we have a very structured and easy way of actually doing branch development.
Yeah, the challenge is really the merging. It's relatively easy. You can always make a copy somewhere else or on your same computer and work on it, and then decide to make that the process. You cannot do, unfortunately, what you really want is multiple developers can take their own branches and then merge them back into main, and that we just don't have support from the platform to be able to do that yet. But tools like Devon and Otto can do that to some degree to help you at least manage what can be managed to do that.
I see a lot of our users that use the branching feature to do more like experimentation work. So not as much like splitting it out per developer, although as you say, that's the ideal. But if you imagine you have a stable development copy, and then you're gonna suddenly implement some new functionality that's gonna mess around with your architecture or something like that. Maybe you don't want to do that in your stable development one. Then it's nice to kind of duplicate it in a way where you can test that out and experiment in a risk-free way, and then you can put those changes back in if you want to.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other great comments in the chat. From a project management standpoint, even if you don't use the deployment tools, just bringing in some DevOps practices is a great way to follow up on changes, what to do, what's been done, and have some documentation for the teams. I like Salvatore's comment too. There's also risk management of boredom. If you've made the change once and then if you have to manually make the change again, it felt like an afterthought. Wasn't, so you were more likely to make mistakes there. And, last, and I think this is a good segue to the next part of the session, is I've been working on a live system for years, but it's for a small in-house group. I would love to start working in a development and production environment. What are some best practices to get started on that path?
I think so. It depends on if your solution is a single file, then it's relatively easy to be able to do just make a copy on your server, and that could be like if you only have one server, that's all you got, and you have one file, you can start by just simply making a copy and changing the name and doing your work in that, and then you could use the data migration tool to actually do the migrations between them. You could do it all manually, and that would be one step. The next step would be to adopt, one of the tools to do the migration part for you. If you have multiple files, you're going to need to manage the file name changes a little bit more. You're going to have to use a tool like Otto can do file name changes and rename the internal file references for you as part of that fly. Or now you need two servers where you have the same names, but you have two servers. The big roadblock there is you can't have files of the same name on the same server. So if you can do 2 servers, that's the nicest, simplest, easy way to go, is get a second server, put your dev files there, and now you can do development. And when you're ready to do a push to production, you can do that using the tools that we'll show you. That's kind of the ladder getting into it, is start with that.
Yep. A couple of questions. Can you have one server and then just run your dev files locally?
Yes, you can. I typically don't advise that because you probably want to make sure those dev files are getting backed up. So your best practices would be to be running those on a server. Also, less likelihood of file corruption if you happen to crash during the FileMaker files. I still have a lot of very gun shy to local FileMaker development, because in earlier versions of FileMaker, if you crashed FileMaker files locally, you had corrupt files. Like 100% of the time they were corrupt. That's not true anymore. Like the files are, the robustness of the FileMaker application is much better. It crashes less. When it does crash, it tends to not corrupt the files to the extent that it used to, but still the risk is there. You're better off doing work on a FileMaker server in terms of just maintaining backups, protecting from corruption, etc.
Yeah, you also get more features available, right? With both Otto and Devon, you can schedule deployments. So say that you have like scheduled service windows. Then if you have files on your local computer, there's no way to trigger things when your computer like is asleep. So talking best practice, it really is to separate the development from the production, also in a virtual machine or server level. Like ideally you want separate servers for that.
You do. And another thing that's important to think about, more and more true every day, is that FileMaker code, the scripts that are being run, are less and less being run because somebody pushes a button, and more being run by webhooks coming in, API calls coming in, agents, AI agents connecting and running code. All this stuff is running, or server-side scripts that are scheduled to run at certain times and do background processes, or like cron jobs kind of thing. There's a lot of work that's going on the server, and you won't get those features if you're running local FileMaker. There's no server-side scheduling. You can kind of mimic perform script on server, but not really. You really need to run on the application. Most modern FileMaker apps do not run on a desktop. They run on a server. By that, I mean they take advantage of server-side scripting, perform script on server, data APIs, etc. The list goes on and on. It's not just a desktop app anymore.
Yeah, and I think there are
further. Oh, sure.
Oh, I was going to say there's several people have commented that the feature differences and the functionality and behavior of files between local and hosted is different. So that's important. And I think with that, the other request I'm seeing a lot in chat is for some demos of these tools. So why don't we start? David, I think you were going to start.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Also, I think the one other question I saw that I think is important to address, and maybe you can address this as you're doing your demos, is how do you start to coach a development team into adopting DevOps practices if they're not right now?
Yeah, I guess one way to do that is to adopt a tool that has some structure, and then automatically you're kind of forced to following kind of like a structured workflow. At least that's our approach from the Devon perspective. But I will share my screen to see my documentation page here. Great. Yeah, so Devon is a full DevOps platform, and we've tried to build it in a way where you can easily support the version control, the testing, and the deployment automation in your workflows. This documentation is a good place to visit if you are curious about what DevOps is. We have a lot of resources here as well. What I'll show in my demo here is how Devon as a tool kind of facilitates a structured workflow that looks like this. So you have the development stage, then you can continuously test in that stage with practices that we call unit testing and integration testing, stuff like that. I'll show a little bit about that. And then we have an easy way where you can save a version or a build, which is essentially a snapshot of your file. That can then be released. And going back to our talk about branching, here we will release that back to another branch. I'll show that later as well. And then finally, you can then deploy that either to a staging server, to a UAT server, where you have users testing that out in a separate environment, or to one or multiple production servers. And finally, we also have some capabilities that allows you to kind of trigger an automated rollback in different scenarios. But this is the integrated workflow that Devon teach you or allows you to follow, you could say. So I'll get my Devon app open here. I have a demo project. And actually quickly, I'll just show you how my environment looks like here. So here I have a development server, and I have a staging server, and I have a production server. Here you'll notice that I have an underscore dev and underscore main here. And these are the two different branches that I have in Devon. Devon automates this naming for you. Then I have a staging server. They just have the plain name. And I have a production server where, just for the sake of the example, here I have a vertical solution. I have a client A copy, client B copy, client C copy. That's just to show you what we're working with here. I can open up here a project workspace, and here I see my two files that are part of this project. When I click on this, here I get a complete history of changes made to this file. The light blue line here is my main branch, and the orange one is my development branch. And these are essentially just two different copies of the file. Each dot here, each of these dots here, they are versions or builds or snapshots, backups, whatever you want to call it, of this file at a certain point in time, and then with a comment associated with it and the developer name as well. And this is accessible to the whole team. So this provides some transparency for the whole team who made what changes. I also have another tab up here called deployment targets. This is where I can connect my development files to other deployment targets on other servers. So this is what we can deploy to. And here I have my ACME data from my staging server, and I have the three different client A, B, C on my prod server. What I can also do is I can link each of these deployments to a specific release branch. So that allows me to do some more advanced flows where, if say you have a testing branch, that allows you to, if you release something to that test branch, it allows you to only be able to deploy to a staging server in that way. But for now, I'll just try to make a very simple example of kind of like a full life cycle where we're making a change to a development file, pushing that to our staging server. We can see here all of our files, they are now on version 5.7, which is the latest. Devon manages these version numbers for you. We also see here 5.7, that's the latest that has been released to main. Now, in order to go into make a modification to this file, I actually have a branch view here. So when I select dev, I see my files in my development branch. From here, I can actually, if I click it, I'll see the version history here. If I click it, I can actually connect to it directly. So this is just all about making life easier, so you don't have to mess around in the open menus and stuff. Here, I'll just open up my script workspace. Let's make a few changes here. And maybe we wanna just delete a bunch of fields. I'll delete this script entirely. Now back in Devon here, I can actually have Devon analyze what we just changed. So it can automatically analyze what changes were done since the latest version that was saved. And here we see that we made a change to our search invoice list script, and we actually deleted the bullet point field script here. We can also see a lot of other changes, basically everything that's in the XML catalogs. I can also open up this detailed view that actually shows me an exact code diff of everything we changed. So here we see I modified the star to a plus, for instance. Now, in order to push this, I'll have to save a version of it. We can make a comment here, made nice changes. Then I can save this with a new version number. Let's do 5.8. When you're saving these versions in Devon, you can either save them as full backups, so they maintain the data, or as clones. So if you have really large development files, the clones would be the way to go. Now we see 5.8 here, that's now made it to the list, and we see the active file have no changes. So if we go back again here to this view, we see 5.8 here, and now we want to release that to our main branch so that we can deploy it. So I can highlight it, and here I can release it to main. I click release. Now what it will do, it'll pop over. So now this is the latest one that's been released. And what that allows us now to do, because we have set all of our deployment targets here, connected them to the main branch, now instead of saying on latest version, now it says update available for all our deployments here. And here we can simply just click deploy and deploy now. And that will automatically handle everything from your development server to the production server, transfer the files, initiate the data migration, analyze the logs, everything. It will automatically roll back if anything happens on the way. So this is kind of like a very, very basic and like the minimal kind of example of how to use Devon. I also said earlier that I would briefly touch upon testing. So here Devon allows you to kind of write your own kind of script tests, and I'll show you an example of that. So if I go back to my file here, and let's just try to open the custom functions. Here I have a custom function called add two numbers. Let's try to modify this. So this function, and this is a stupid example, but it's just for the example's sake. This custom function takes two parameters, number one, number two, and it should add them together, right? But now I've changed this. And the reason why I've done this is because I've actually written a test that will analyze or test whether this still works. So here in my Devon workspace, if I go back here, I also have something called test scripts. And here, Devon will look up all the test scripts that you have in your file, and then you can trigger them from here. So if I click here, it will run all of them sequentially. And this is a way where you can, of course, it requires you to write script tests, but here you have a way of actually testing functionality on a unit or component level before you even deploy it out. So now we see this failed, and we could go back here and we can see why did it fail. And that's where the code diffing comes in handy, because as soon as it's done, we can open up the change view here and look at the custom functions, and we can see, oh, we changed the plus to a minus. So let's go back, change that back. And now I want to run my test again. And it completes. So you can imagine having maybe hundreds of tests here. You don't have to test everything in your solution, but for the interested, you should really Google regression testing and unit testing, integration testing. Those are great concepts to adopt. So this is a way to test something before you actually save the version. Now I could just go ahead and I could save a new version here with a new version number. And I can go back. And by the way, we can actually see here that the migration for our staging server already completed. These are just small files. But now we can just go ahead, 5.9, also release that one. And we could just deploy. We also have a lot of other more advanced functionalities where you can specify script names in this post-migration script option here that uses kind of the same logic as the testing does. So here you could have your own logic for something that you wanted to verify post-migration, and then using the revert on failure tick box here, that will actually roll back the deployment for you automatically. But those are some more advanced concepts, and we don't really have time for that here. But otherwise, I can just click deploy on all of these, and Devon will just handle that for you. You can also schedule it for later. So say that for client B, I want to do the migration on Saturday at 5 in the morning. And now it's scheduled. So this is one of the key points for not doing the local development, because you wouldn't be able to schedule deployment like this. Yeah, I think I'll stop for now.
Yes, there are a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
So just a few kind of logistical or supported things. Does Devon support FileMaker server on Mac OS and Windows?
For the time being, it's only supported on Linux and Windows Server, unfortunately. We deprecated Mac OS. We might bring it back.
Okay. And the client, does that work on Mac and Windows? Or...
Yeah, it does. It's just a FileMaker file, actually.
Okay.
A local FileMaker file.
Yes. And then so when you install, does it install on, like, what is the role, like, what does putting into deployment look like?
So how you install Devon, or?
Yeah. How do you install Devon?
Yeah. So the application, you just install it on a Mac like you would do any other Mac application. And Devon server is installed exactly like you would install FileMaker server. So on Windows Server, it's like a GUI installer. On Linux, it's a script.
Okay. All right, and I think there was like one other question about for the diff analysis and the DDR. So do you need to manually run that, or is that all part of the Devon process?
So you can actually enable it to do it automatically. That's actually what I had. Every time I clicked, it will automatically analyze if it detects any changes in the file. But beware that it can require, especially if you're like a larger team, it can require significant system resources, because in our engine that does the diff, it takes a lot of RAM memory to do that. So.
Yes, I'm just trying to see all the other.
I think that's a point that's worth noting, because we run into this all the time. You're running processes on your development server and on your production servers. And especially when you're doing data migrations, like a lot of people try to run very thin production servers that are just kind of sized just to run production. And frankly, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to need to have a server that has enough capacity to handle the data migrations, which typically means you need, like 2 to 3x times the space of your production files, because you're making copies. And then you need a lot of RAM, because the data migration tools and the developer tools are very RAM hungry. They'll just suck up every CPU and RAM resource they can. And so you just have to know that. If you have a practice of running a thin dev server, you're going to need to get a bigger dev server, and also probably production too. It's going to have to be sized appropriately to manage the extra load that'll happen during those migrations.
Yeah. We tend to say that we suggest leaving at least 4 gigabytes of memory per concurrent migration that you're intending to do.
Yeah.
And in our development mode, I think the diff tool won't run if you have less than 7 gigabytes of memory available or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty hungry.
Yeah, so you're going to need to beef it up. Especially the dev server is actually where a lot of the work happens with the XML generation and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But production is going to need to handle disk space. We run to people, they run on disk space because if you have a 10 gigabyte data file, when you migrate it, you're going to have at least 2 copies of that because when you migrate, it makes a new copy of the file. So depending on how your disks are configured, you're just going to need to have that extra space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, David, last, just to wrap up, can you do a quick overview of like costs and plans just at a high level so that people can see that?
Sure. Do you want me to share my screen or just?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
works.
sure. Does. Let me see here. So if you go to Devon.fm, the Devon FM website here, we have some pricing here. We have 3 different paid plans. We have a free tier. It doesn't give you the diffing. It doesn't give you scheduled deployments, and there's a few other things that it doesn't give you. But otherwise, we have a solo, team, and enterprise plan. Solo, 1 developer. Team, up to 5 developers. And enterprise is unlimited developers. Yeah, 10, 15, and $50 per server per month. So, and we're doing a promo now, 20% off until February 8th.
All right, and I think like this is one question I think for both Todd and you, David, is when you're putting together the migration plan, and if your files are hosted in a corporate data center, do you need physical access to any of those server machines, or can all work be done remotely?
It can all be done remotely. Like the servers that I just demoed here, they are EC2 instances on AWS. So
one thing that throws people is if you have a production server, you have one server like in a cloud and one server in your office. That's depending on how you configure it. Those servers need to talk. They need to be able to communicate. And so if you have your home network does not have a public IP address for that server or a VPN connection through to that server, then the other servers won't be able to talk to it. So there are ways if you've only got one-way access, you can still make that work, but this throws people a lot. The servers need to have at least one server needs to be able to reach the other server. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do this manual. You're not going to be able to do this automated transfer. So that could be tricky. But if you're in a cloud, they're all going to be available more than likely. Unless you have a VPN, then you're going to have VPN configures, and your IT department's going to help you with that.
yeah, we try to do it done it very easily in Devon. All communication goes through the same SSL certificate as FileMaker server has, so you don't have to configure anything on that. But of course, if you are in a cloud environment, you got to make sure to open up the firewall for standard HTTPS communication.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Todd, do you want to show a little Otto?
Sure. So I made this little web page because I don't really like slides. And you can actually go and follow along if you want. It's automatic-devops.vercel.app. I can't guarantee this will be up forever, but it does have all the links to the important information I'm going to show. So you can peruse through this at your leisure. And let me just walk through this. So the Automatic platform is our full DevOps platform. It's not just for doing software development lifecycle, but it also is a hosting platform with 32 data centers around the world. You can spin up servers on our platform. You can also connect your own servers to our platform. And for everything I'm going to show you today, there's no additional cost. If you're getting servers from us, then you're going to pay us for those servers. But OttoFMS, auto deploy, everything else that I show you, there's no cost. It's all free. So you actually don't have to pay us anything to use any of this stuff I'm going to show. So let me start by jumping into the automatic console. So the automatic console is your sort of unified view of all of your servers. Now, if you're an in-house developer with just 2 servers, probably doesn't interest you that much. But if you have a lot of customers or you have a lot of servers that you're managing, this is a way to bring them all together. So you can have these running on our clouds, you can have these running on other clouds. The only requirement is they need to have OttoFMS installed on the server. So I've got actually a bunch of organizations that I'm a member of, and I'm just showing you the my sample org here. I've got 3 servers running, and we've got a couple different views of that. You can get the card view, or you can get a list view, and you get the stats of what's happening on those servers. Now, if I drill in to say Harkonnen here, and I look, I've got the full dashboard of what you see with the admin console, but with our own take on it, plus a whole bunch of other additional things that we built on top. So you've got your FileMaker server thing, which you've got clients, you've got databases, etc. Here are the 2 files that are running on this server. And one of the interesting things is, so going back to my servers, this is an on-prem server. This is running on a Mac Mini right down here below my desk. And it's running here. These others are running in our automatic cloud, right? But we have a whole bunch of features that are just really simple and easy to use here. If you look on Dragon, and if you go into FileMaker server, actually, I meant to delete these. One of the things you can do is you can close these and you can delete these, right? Like you can with the admin console. But let's say this is my local dev server. I'm using it for local dev stuff. I want to do some experiments. And my dev files are over here on Harkonnen. I can just grab these 2 files and I can say send to another server. And I can select from all of my servers. Dragon. Dragon. And I can now just send those files over. And it's going to just send those files to my server sitting here on my Mac Mini. I can do whatever I want. I can work on them. I can do whatever I want. And I can then later push them back to production. So this is, one way in which we have sort of similar to what we just saw with Devon. It's less structured, where you just sort of, it's you can develop your own practices around it, but you get kind of that same ability. We don't call this a branch, just sending them over there. I do the work, and then when I want to send them back, I can do that migration back at a later time. And so they've now been moved over, or they're being moved over, and eventually they'll show back up on that server. We do have, I'm just going to close this and let that run while it's happening. We do have, I'm not going to go into it, but we do have projects, which is a more structured approach to all of this, which is kind of what we saw with Devon a little bit. But I'm going to show us just some other things that we have instead, since we've already got a really good example of what that sort of structured professional software development lifecycle looks like. So let's do a deployment in auto style, just to run through that. So in order to do a deployment, what we have is the equivalent. We have something called auto deploy, and I'm just going to open that up here in FileMaker. It's going to show up on my other screen, of course. And we drag that over here, and let's make it a deployment. So I've already set this up. I've connected it to my 3 servers, so it can already talk to those. I want to go and set up a deployment. So let's do that. We'll call this demo. We'll select the Harkonnen, which is my dev server, select Atreides, which is my production server. We'll set up the default file options. And in this case, we're just running with some simple stuff. Encryption keys we don't have for this. Other options you can do, I click save. I'll note that there are advanced options. So auto deploy and OttoFMS have a whole variety of different types of deployments that you can configure and set up. So you can go from dev to production. You can go you can pull your production files back to a staging file and then take your dev files and and run them on top of that. So you can refresh your staging server every night if you want automated. So there's a lot of different kinds of development or deployment patterns that you can do, and you'll get access to those by using the advanced options. That's way too much to get into for this. Once we've got that, we'll select our 2 files, and we're going to get some options here. I can migrate, I can replace. We're just going to stick with migrate. I'm going to review, and I can schedule for later. I can run now, and we'll just let that kick up, and it's now running. And if I want to navigate back to a Trades where that deployment is running, we can see that it's running here, and you can get a sort of real-time update of what's happening on that server. So what's happening in the background is it's asked the development server to make a build, and once that build's done, it sends that build over to the production server, and it does the data migration and reopens the files, and you get a nice view of what that looks like and all the log and everything that's involved in that. So that's that. I'm going to move pretty quickly through a couple of other things. I want to show a new feature that we just released today, actually, or yesterday, top call stats analysis, which is available on the Automatic platform, where you can do top calls. Analysis is great for looking at things that are happening in, you can do externally stored container data. Somebody was asking about that. I saw it's all possible. You can do that. I'm going to pull the top call stats from our production server here, which is a Trades, and we'll just pull that over. And so there's our top call. We're seeing this is the demo. There's not a lot of activity happening on this file, so don't expect any big revelations. One of the things about top call stats is it's really nice if you can get the IDs of all the internal elements, because it doesn't actually give you those out of the box. It just gives you these table 132 kind of things. So you can also pull the XML right over as well. And to do that, I'm going to need to enter admin credentials for the files. I think I got that right. Oh, let me view that. Yeah. Why am I not able to pull that? I may just skip this process. I don't know why that is not lighting up. Well, I'm going to skip it. When it ran again, we just released this yesterday, so I may have just discovered a quick bug, but that will then replace these names with the actual table name instead of the table ID, right? So this is very useful. One of the primary reasons we did this is our customers on the hosting platform are constantly saying, my solution is slow, my solution is slow. And now we give them a tool where you can just go and examine why your solution is slow, and you can figure it out. It's very helpful for that. The last thing I'm going to cover is we are in the age of AI. So one of the things I want to show on our servers here is when you drill into a server, you notice you've got MCP servers. So you can actually set up MCP servers that can connect to things like Claude Desktop and Cursor and all the other tools that can use MCP servers. And you can set these up to run scripts on your solution and pull data out and do data analysis, blah, blah, blah. But you can also do admin functionality with Otto. So I have connected up. If you look in your connectors here, we have FileMaker server, our Conan set up here. And so basically a lot of the useful things that you can get from the Automatic or the OttoFMS API or the admin API, you can now get right into your chat app. So I can ask how many files are on my FileMaker server. And the beautiful thing about AI is it doesn't care if I make typos. So now it's going to reach out and list the FMP files, and it's going to come back. Here are the two files. It's going to give me a nice, there's what's there. I can also do fun things like I can use a nice voice to text like I have and say, give me a clone of the proof chat file that I can download. And what it's going to do is make a file down. It's going to make a clone in the background, and it's going to give me a link to that clone. And I'll be able to click that and just download it right here. So boom, it's going to open it up, and there you saw that the download folder pop there, and there is proof chat clone right there. So that's all the time we have to cover today in terms of the things that the automatic platform can do. There's a lot of good information on this webpage, a lot of the links to the documentation, and a lot of links to, if you want to just learn more about OttoFMS or the Cloud Console or whatever, it's all here. And you can look at the documentation. Whoop, that link's broken. I'll have to fix that. There's the OttoFMS docs. And we've got search, and you can actually search this with AI to help you figure out how all this platform works together. You can plug in this link into Claude Code or whatever, and it's optimized for LLM searching, and so it'll do a really good job to help you figure out how to use the automatic platform. ChatGPT and Claude can help you do that as well. So I'll stop there.
So a couple quick things. Please take our closing survey. Just want to know what you thought. If we have increased your confidence even a little bit in starting to explore and use DevOps, again, click on the apps button, which is the 3 squares in the lower right, and just answer those 3 quick questions. Martha just kindly dropped in the link to register for our next Community Live 2 weeks from today. We're going to go back to Claris MCP, and in that one, Louis and Yi Chen are going to walk me through setting up MCP Live. So it'll be fun. I have not played with MCP at all. So this is going to be, I'm in the same boat that many of you are in with some of these tools. And I think, there were a few other questions, but we're pretty much out of time. I think one question that I think, I don't know if you can address this quickly for both platforms. If you generally work with your production files encrypted and your dev files not encrypted, is that something that can be added as part, the encryption and decryption be added as part of the workflow?
It can. We allow you to do that. You can add that.
Not in Devon. They have to be similar because the data migration tool requires it. So yeah, we haven't.
Yeah, we're adding a layer of decryption and encryption that can happen on the fly there. So you can
that's nice
for that.
All right. And I just want to add 2 other things. I know, Todd, tell us about your office hours. Like, you run weekly office hours.
So if you go to the docs and search for office hours, you can get the link to that. But we have office hours twice a week. And that is basically just a time for you can come and just chat with either me or Kyle about whatever your questions are regarding automatic, OttoFMS, auto deploy, whatever. And you just sign up for a slot and you can jump on and ask whatever questions. There's also community.automatic.cloud where people can ask questions about, again, the whole platform. Also, people ask about Proof Chat, which is our AI embedded chat for FileMaker that you can do and things like that. But those are 2 good resources for helping understand some of this stuff. Learn more about it.
And David also kindly shared that for Devon, they do free onboarding, and I just dropped the link to make a get started appointment with him. And so with that, thank you very much, Todd. Thank you, David.
Thanks, everyone.
Spend time with you today. And I hope you all enjoyed the presentation, and recording will be up in the community later today or first thing tomorrow Eastern time. And we will also send you the link early next week. So bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
In
Bye
2
bye.
weeks.